Hello, and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today, we're talking about a spicy topic, sexuality and intimacy in relationships. And maybe before we get into it, can you talk a bit more or even define what is intimacy, what it looks like, and same thing with sexuality?
Yeah, no problem. Easy. So sex is something I love to talk about. Intimacy is something I love to talk about. Vulnerability. I think that there should be, when we're in our authentic alignment and our most magnetic selves, there can be a delightful connection between the two. But currently in humanity, the two are often separate, and we often substitute sex for deep intimacy or vulnerability. So sexuality is just a normal, healthy expression of a biological human desire that different people feel in different levels. So there are people who have incredibly high sex drives, and there are people who have a low sex drive. There can also be biological aspects. Like I've worked with a lot of men, and some of them, when they experience low testosterone from all the environmental things that we have in all the chemicals and things that impact fertility and hormones, cell phones and Roundup on our lawns and all of these things, they sometimes experience low testosterone. That can cause a low sex drive. But then there's also an authentic component to that where some people have a very high sex drive. Sex can be used as a replacement, like I said, for vulnerability and intimacy. And it can also just become a type of addiction. So there's also some parts work, if anybody wants to refer back to our parts work episode, that can be sprinkled in there. And yeah, I think this is going to be a really fun episode.
Can you talk a bit more about sex as replacement on what does it look like or what are some of the reasons for that?
So if a man has been conditioned by his family, church, society, where our current snapshot of evolution, to suppress emotions, not taught how to be open and vulnerable, but celebrated for his sexual prowess. And obviously, we all have biological needs and urges, and there's nothing wrong with that. I read all kinds of statistics before this episode, and they were all so different, so I don't know which one to quote. But men typically think about sex a lot of times a day, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when they don't know how to get those core needs of love and belonging met, sometimes the closest they can get is feeling that connection of sexuality with someone else. So while it is just a normal, valid, healthy urge and can be a lot of fun, like anything, as we've talked about in other episodes, anything itself can be on the light side or the shadow side. I don't like this sort of grimness of the shadow side analogy, but it can be helpful or unhelpful, healthy or still waiting to become healthy. So it's not black and white or binary. It's just about self-inquiry and saying, is this in the healthy end of this? Is this meeting a need in a healthy way? Or is this meeting a deeper need in an unconscious, unhealthy way? To meet those needs of love and belonging, acceptance, appreciation, admiration, and all of those things that we talked about in previous episodes.
Can you talk a bit more on the importance of or how to create safety when it comes to intimacy? What's the role in that? And maybe talk a bit more also on differences between men and women when it comes to intimacy.
Yes, absolutely. And this is an important one that I discuss with a lot of men. Actually, I was discussing this with one of my clients yesterday. And I was explaining that in order to feel a healthy form, because again, women can have healthy or unhealthy or helpful or unhelpful expressions of sexuality. Again, sexuality itself is neutral. It's the energy behind it and how we're using it. Like any tool is neutral. It depends how you're using the tool. But with women, we really need to feel safe to open up intimacy and deep, meaningful sexual connection. So, and men need to have sex to feel close. So it's this sort of paradoxical relationship where the way that we get our needs met currently, typically, if I'm generalizing, are somewhat misaligned. So I tell men constantly, if you want to have more sex with your partner, make her feel safe. And not only safe at home, like, yeah, we have a security system and I pay all the bills. Those things are great. And I celebrate you for those things. But what she needs is to feel emotionally safe. And I tell men all the time, I told this to my client yesterday. I was like, oh, that's all you want is more sex with your wife? Great. I'll tell you exactly and specifically how to get that. And we talk about that last week in our episode about love languages and attachment styles. So it's making our partner, when their needs are being met and their emotional bank account is full, as long as there is not a layer of trauma, which is possible, or a layer of biology, which is possible. I'm going through a hormonal transition in my life and it definitely changes everything. So I'm not saying this is the only reason, but it can be very helpful to first create that foundation of safety emotionally and allow her to be vulnerable without feeling defensive, attacked, and just listening to her and having conversations with her is going to help her feel safe to give you the intimacy and sexual experiences that you need to feel close to her.
Are there any, for men listening, any signs that they could look for if their partner is feeling safe or unsafe within relationship?
I think having a conversation with them is helpful, but also so many of us were not taught a lot of these skills growing up. So somebody may not even know themselves if they feel safe or not. They may not know what feeling safe feels like. Again, it depends on the level of trauma they've experienced. And I think as a species, we're relatively traumatized. So I think it's fair to assume that most people have some sort of emotional or attachment trauma, because we don't get to choose what our body stores or experiences as trauma. Trauma can be, running downstairs when you're 6, wearing a fancy outfit with cowboy boots and a skirt and a weird sweater and being like, look, I look amazing. And your parents saying, oh my God, you look ridiculous. Go change. We're late. Stop that. Whatever it is, or a kid pointing you out in school and saying, you pee your pants, whatever it is. Our nervous system can record those experiences as trauma. So I just want to acknowledge that there is layers of trauma here that we cannot completely unpack for each individual within the container of one podcast episode. But I like that sort of assuming that other people's reactions are coming from a valid place of historical comparison or experience. So it's being really honest with ourselves, communicating very lovingly without judgment, and constantly inquiring within our own body and constantly inquiring with our partner.
And I also had a question about how men can navigate them being made feeling bad about them wanting to have sex or having that, because I feel like a lot of times men are seen as, oh, that's all you want. How can men address that or deal with some emotions that might be coming with that, even like with them starting to judge themselves or feel like something's wrong with them? How can they navigate that?
Well, I think there's a few layers here. And I think it's a very good question because a lot of society both simultaneously promotes men as sexual virile beings, but also shames them for being that. And a lot of men tell me, they're like, well, I feel ashamed or dirty or like a pervert or whatever. So they are suppressing that authentic need. They are taking that sexual part of them. Refer back to our parts work episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. And they are suppressing that authentic part to the subconscious and denying it. And remember, I said we either meet a need directly or we manipulate to get it met. An extreme example of this would be certain religions where they are taught that sex is bad or wrong or dirty, and especially telling men that they have to abstain from sex can sometimes manifest as these subconscious parts playing out their sexuality in very inappropriate, abusive ways, perhaps with people that are not of an age to have sexual consent. So that's an extreme example of not getting our needs met, or suppressing or judging or creating shame within that authentic part of ourselves. A lot of men tell me that they feel that their wife makes them feel dirty or like annoyed for wanting sex. And that's definitely something I've seen with women and working with men and women and couples, or just in my friend circles. I've heard people say things like, well, I'm just not going to have sex with him for the night. You know, I'm punishing him. I haven't had sex with him for 4 months, and almost using it like a badge of honor. And I'm like, wait, but that means you don't get to have sex for 4 months either. That's not like, that doesn't seem like a win-win here. That seems like punishing him and punishing you. So I would like to acknowledge that it must be very confusing messaging for men. And also depending on what the cultural and religious belief that you were exposed to growing up and what their view of sex is. So again, in order to fit in, we would have maybe suppressed some of our authentic expressions of sacred sexuality in order to appear like a good person. And the deeper and more shadowy these desires get, the more they have a chance, again, if we don't give that part of ourselves a seat at the table and give it a chance to hold the talking stick, it tends to do a hostile takeover from the subconscious and facilitate maybe needing to go to sex trade workers, or getting angry and resentful and bitter, passive aggressive, deflecting, disconnected, cheating. It could lead to any of those things. Excessive pornography use.
I have a follow-up question on suppressing the sexual needs. Is there a way how men listening can identify that that's something that they have been doing, or like, is there something that can help them to raise awareness of them actually doing it, instead of they might be going through the consequences of doing it, but is there something that can help them to identify that that's something that they have been doing?
I think self-inquiry is great. Just sort of even having the awareness to ask yourself that question is an amazing first step. And I think most of us know if we're like fantasizing a lot, but we don't talk about it. Or I have a client right now who's like, I really want to give and receive more oral sex from my partner, but I'm terrified to ask for it. So I think you know. And then we can also look at the helpful versus unhelpful things that help us, that help program our sexuality in society, like pornography. Because then there can be a layer of dopamine addiction in sexuality, or we can be needing more and more stimulation and more interesting, kinky things from a place of just needing more and more stimulation for the brain, which again could be helpful and authentic, or it could be a coping mechanism or a dopamine addiction. And there's lots of things that you can go read about the effects and impact on your relationship of pornography addictions, which are very normal and very widespread. And again, if you don't know how to feel your feelings deeply, but you can feel good from pornography and excessive masturbation or excessive sexual partners, there's nothing shameful or bad or wrong about that. It's just that it might be suboptimal to the experience of a deep, connected, open, vulnerable, mutually gratifying sacred sexual practice.
Is there a way how men can deal with shame and guilt that might come with even like something that they either want to ask their partner that they want to experiment with, or them feeling like they're a monster for wanting certain things, or just like wanting a lot of sex or thinking a lot about it? Like, maybe the first question would be, what are the main emotions that come with that, and how could they navigate those emotions?
I think you knocked it out of the park. I think a lot of it is shame, feeling bad, not knowing how to have that conversation. And ladies, this is a lot on us too. We have to create a mutually safe place. to talk about things that are important to us. And men, that means that you have to create a safe space to hold space for women to talk about their emotions without making it mean that you're a failure, without judging or freaking out. And ladies, we have to create a safe space for men to talk about their authentic desires and what they want. And hoping that the relationship you're in has compatibility in that area. Because it doesn't, if you love oral sex, but your partner really authentically dislikes oral sex, it's not loving to say, well, now you have to give it to me to love me. That might be an unfortunate incompatibility. But maybe there's something that both of you like that you could try. And again, the happier your partner is and the more they feel safe, seen, heard, and validated, the more they are going to want to have intimate time with you. And I think because I know for me, for sure, a lot of our initial experience with sexuality is through pornography. It creates this sort of distortion or delusion of what sex can be. Whereas in some of the Eastern traditions where they are experiment more with tantric sexuality and use sexuality as a form of spiritual expansion and deep connection. And I think when I studied tantric arts and sacred sexuality and things like that, it, to me, to my experience, makes a lot of sense as using sexuality as a catalyst for deeper connection. Like anything, sex can be used as a medicine or it can be used as a drug. Food can be used as a medicine or food can be used as a drug. Pornography could be, maybe helpful for some people and maybe a fun way to express filming themselves and watching it and exploring an authentic voyeuristic delight, or it can be used as a mental addiction and substitution to numb pain or avoid intimacy with your partner or overstimulate your dopamine receptors so that you can't actually enjoy sex with your partner because it's not stimulating enough. So again, there's so many nuances here. We're not just a black or white species. So I like to be cautious with how I speak about things to remember that there is also these other layers. We're somewhat complex beings.
With what you just mentioned about using pornography as a way to avoid intimacy, what are some of the reasons why men might want to avoid intimacy?
Well, fortunately, we have an entire podcast series exactly about that people can go back and listen to. It's called The Magnetic Masculinity Blueprint. Well, that's a great question, Astra. It's because it's unfamiliar. Again, we've cut off men's emotional legs in childhood, and then we put them in emotional-based relationships. And we're like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk up the stairs? You can't walk up the stairs because we cut their legs off. And I don't think it's about blaming men because women raised men for the most part. So I think it's about looking together, anybody, anywhere on any gender spectrum, and saying, how can we just support each other to feel safe, to be more authentic and curious and explorative with each other, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever, so that we create a different paradigm and redefine what it means to be a man, and understanding that one of the characteristics of magnetic masculinity is vulnerability and authenticity. And it's probably going to be hard for you at the beginning. And I honor that, but it's really important. It's like, feel uncomfortable and do it anyways.
And you mentioned that for women to feel safe, they need to have that kind of emotional piece of it.
Yeah.
What is it that men might need that you have seen in your experience? Is it also emotional? Is it something else for them to feel that, okay, I'm safe?
Again, there are layers of personality there. There are layers of level of trauma there. But if I was to speak generally, the more able we are to be vulnerable and authentic, the safer we feel. And it's knowing the same as your partner wants. It's knowing that when you express something like, hey, I feel disrespected, or I feel like you don't desire me. First of all, it requires being honest about what you feel and creating a relationship with your partner where you feel seen, heard, understood. What this looks like a lot of times is, let me think. I think our relationship isn't working. You never want to have sex with me. You never listen to me. I feel like you don't even care about me. You'd rather go golfing with your buddies than stay home with me. Well, I go out and pay the bill, whatever. It starts going into one of these dances instead of I feel this, and your partner going, okay, let me stop everything. Tell me what you're feeling, because how you feel matters to me. Let me listen to you and not become defensive or deflective or invalidating or passive aggressive or any of the coping mechanisms that we develop to avoid intimacy. And again, our episode last week could be helpful, and also doing the work on your own to feel safe to stand in your truth, even if other people flip out about it and don't like it. It doesn't mean we invalidate them. It doesn't mean that we don't want to connect to other people. We do, but it's standing in your own truth and giving other people permission to choose if they prefer that flavor or not. Like, instead of saying, I'm totally vanilla, just like you. If you're not, if you're strawberry, instead you want to be like, okay, you know what? I've done some exploration. I'm not vanilla. I am strawberry ice cream. Do you like strawberry ice cream? And if somebody's like, no, I hate strawberry ice cream, doesn't mean you're bad or wrong. It just means that they want somebody who's vanilla. And then you go out and find somebody who's like, strawberry, that's amazing. I love strawberry. This is delicious. It's so sweet and fruity. I love the color, so we've talked about that before too, that being authentic doesn't mean everybody is going to like you, and that's okay.
And here, kind of to continue what you started talking about, that compatibility, like how can men navigate if both people in a relationship, they have different kind of wants or preferences, and some of them might not be alignment with what you want to give versus what the person wants to receive? Like, how can they navigate that? And because some people might be listening, they're like, oh, this must be a deal breaker then. So how can they navigate those differences? Also keeping in mind what you said in some previous episodes about treating the other person's wants, needs, boundaries, and values as important as their own.
It requires constant connecting with each other, communicating. And I mean, let's give an example. Say somebody is like, I want to have sex 3 times a day, at least 4 days a week. Now, the first thing you could look at, is that just your authentic preference? And if so, that's valid. There's nothing wrong with that, because you could maybe find somebody else who's like, I love having sex 3 times a day, 4 times a week. But everybody at some points, at different points in their life, might have ebbs and flows. So you might have periods where you're like super sexually turned on and tuned in, and times when you're stressed or tired and not as tuned in. So it requires constant communication and being really honest with each other. And then looking at, or am I using sex as a replacement for intimacy? What if we had a massage night? Or what if we had, because at the end of the day, it's either the dopamine we're getting from the sex, that release of all the different chemicals that get released through orgasm, or we're seeking connection. So there can be other ways other than sex to connect. It's just often men aren't aware of those, or those feel unfamiliar. And you might have 2 people who are genuinely both like, I like sex every 2 weeks or so. That's perfect too. There's no wrong way to feel about that. There's just, again, constant communication. And if your partner wants far less sex than you, there is things you could look at. You could visit your doctor, have your hormone levels checked. You could also see if your partner, if she's just like vacuuming floors and driving kids to school all day and barely talking to adults until you get home from work, and then you're like, why isn't she, just doesn't have very high sex drive? men, we got to take some accountability here. You got to make your woman feel like a queen. You got to tell her, man, you look so sexy. I so appreciate it. It must be so hard to just do these thankless tasks every day. Again, I'm generalizing and gender stereotyping. I'd like to acknowledge. So there can be some accountability in that might not be biochemical, that might be situational. Like, how often are you communicating to her that you love her in ways that she likes to receive, like we talked about in love languages? You know, what is the layer of attachment style going on there? And what is it that you guys both love to do when you met each other? And how many areas of your life are you applying that, not only in the bedroom? Like when we first meet each other, we're like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. And men will hang on to every word that the woman says, and everything she does you think is so adorable and cute. And then you guys want to have sex all night and into the morning. And then as things go on in life, you know, we get responsibilities, and men have the mortgage to pay and women have the mortgage to pay, or either one of them has children to raise, or they're raising children together, or whatever rule that they decide is good for them. But often they expect the sexuality component to stay fresh, but that also requires work. And if we're not doing the other parts that we also had at the beginning, like listening, having conversations, going on dates, calling and being like, you look so pretty today. I was thinking about you all day at work. You know, I was speaking to another client last week, and we mapped out what he could do to get more sex in his relationship, which is working really well for him. And he was like, that's it? And I was like, that's it. Message me in a month if you need another session. But like, that's it. It's most of what you need to do often is free. And you just need to take that time. And a lot of men, I've dealt with a lot of infidelity. And it's something I've dealt with in my own relationships, both having been cheated on and cheating myself. So it's something I've done a deep exploration into. And often that is as a result of not getting needs met or other distortions or other trauma. But it's looking at what is it that I'm getting from the other person that I'm not getting in my relationship? And am I communicating that need in a healthy, compassionate, honest, vulnerable way? So I have another client right now who's a serial cheater, and I don't mind that. I'll work with anybody. I like exploring. I don't judge him. I like exploring why this is happening. And what we discovered was that the women he was cheating with were making him feel respected and adored and admired. He just wanted that freshness. He just wanted his wife to say, you look hot. Like, your job is sexy. Thank you for protecting people all day. Thank you. He just wanted to be adored and admired, and he felt like the minute he walked in the door, he'd be like, oh, thank God you're here. Can you take the diapers out and this and that, which is valid. Her experience is valid too. But if you both want a little more of like those needs we talked about, adoration, admiration, appreciation, you want to look at how much am I filling my partner's cup. So owning that for him, owning that infidelity is like, hey, I really caused a huge betrayal wound. There's almost no bigger wound to cause than that betrayal wound, that betrayal and abandonment of stepping out of that agreement in a relationship. But it's owning that and saying, I did that. Here's why I did that, not as an excuse, but here's what I want or need in the future so that I'm getting my needs met. And that doesn't mean, well, I'm going to cheat on you unless you give me 5 blowjobs a week.
Yeah, I was about to ask about that.
That's not what it looks like, man. That's not what it looks like. It's that mutual exploration of, if she feels adored, appreciated, admired, and safe, you're not going to have to worry about having this conversation. So I gave him a recipe of like, message her once throughout the day and tell her you're thinking of her. When she gets home, ask her what she did all day. Listen to that and say, if you think this, if be honest, but I'm like, okay, what does she do on an average day? And he told me, I'm like, that sounds very boring. Do you think you'd enjoy doing that every day? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that even for 20 minutes. And I was like, so maybe she needs to feel appreciated for that. Maybe she needs you to say, let me make dinner tonight. Why don't you go have a hot bubble bath? You know, why don't you give her a massage once in a while? Why don't you tell her she's a queen? Why don't you tell her what an amazing mother she is? Why don't you tell her all the things you want to hear? You know, and then if we just be honest about what we really want, and we're constantly checking in with those wants, needs, boundaries, and values, the conversation about sex becomes a lot different, except, of course, unless there is a layer of trauma or a layer of biochemical malfunctioning, like low estrogen or low testosterone or something like that. Or just the natural ebbs and flows we have in general life, which are totally valid too.
Can you talk a bit more on that sense of, or how men could deal with that sense of rejection that might come with their partner rejecting sex or not, for whatever reason, but especially if it has been like repetitive experience and they keep getting that like rejection, how could they navigate it, or how could they deal with emotions that might come up with that?
Well, if you feel like you're deeply rejected or abandoned or disrespected, it might be that your partner is in a pissy mood and might be in her own shadow parts and might be in her own deficit of her emotional bank account. But there's also a possibility that that is a core wound you have that is being triggered when your partner turns down sex, because turning down sex might simply mean I'm exhausted and I don't feel like it. But what men often make it mean is I'm a failure as a man. I'm not attracted. My partner doesn't respect me. My partner doesn't love me. My partner doesn't want to be close to me. So we want to be accountable to what we are making it mean, because if men have a huge reaction of like, I can't believe you don't want to have sex with me, because they make it mean that they're not loved, but really the woman doesn't mean that. She might just mean I'm exhausted, like I'm drained, and my body doesn't feel like doing that. So there's a level of accountability. Again, one of the tools I like for accountability is asking yourself, what am I making it mean? And you can say, like, if you're going to punish her for feeling like she's rejected you, you can be honest about it and say, I'll say things like this to my partner and my friends. I'll say, I made that mean that you don't think I'm attractive. Is that what it means? Like if my partner turns down sex or something, I'll sometimes think about it. If I start feeling crunchy about it or something about it, I'll do some self-inquiry and then I'll say, I made that mean that you don't think I'm attractive anymore. Is that what it means? And he'll be like, oh, hell no. You know, and I'm like, okay, good. I just validate that, because if I feel like he is completely rejecting me or does not find me attractive, or a man feels like he is being completely rejected, disrespected, like she doesn't desire him, he's going to feel awful. And when we feel awful, we tend to behave in ways that are not creating the hospitable environment for our partner to feel sexually aroused with us. And it might be that she might be rejecting it because she feels ugly naked. Or a lot of women tell me they're like, in couples, when we talk about sex, which I love talking about, she'll tell me, well, I've gained like 15 pounds. I have cellulite now. And he likes having sex with the lights on. And I think I look ugly. Like there could be so many reasons that your partner is rejecting you. And they probably have less to do. They might have something to do with you, but they might have something to do with your partner. So again, if we're not communicating and doing some accountability and self-inquiry and conscious communication with our partner, we're just going to keep on making up assumptions and probably causing more disconnection in the relationship. Something else you can do is you could take a tantric course together or schedule intimate time and really prioritize that intimate time. And whether that intimate time leads to sex or not, you decide as a couple what feels delicious for you to schedule that time, because especially if you're parents and you're both working and you're busy and you're tired and life happens and the dog happens and the dog throws up and the kid needs to go to soccer and dinner needs to be made, it can be hard to shift gear from that to like, hey, I'm like this desirable god and goddess wanting to come together and create sexual alchemy. But really scheduling that and prioritizing that and saying, we're doing it even if we don't feel like it. That doesn't mean we have to do things that make us uncomfortable or make us feel unsafe. If it just becomes touch and massage or whatever we decide, but just both people agreeing that we are prioritizing that intimate time and being accountable that we are filling our partner's bucket and reminding them that they're attractive and reminding them what we like about them and whatever it is that they want to receive to feel safe and adored and admired. And yeah, when I work with clients, sometimes I'm like, how would you feel if you came home from work and your partner was like, thank you for working so hard all day. I'm gender stereotyping. I'd like to acknowledge I'm doing it for the sake of metaphorical alignment. Don't come for me, or do. That's fine too. I accept you as however you are. I made dinner for you tonight. Thank you for buying all these groceries. Thank you for paying for this organic food to nourish our family. You look really hot. If we, men are just like, what? I can have that with my wife. I'm like, yeah. Is that how you treat your wife? Do you come home and tell her it was hard being away from you all day? You're such a goddess. Look at you. Even when your hair is all scraggly and you've been looking after the kids all day, there's nobody who has a nicer waist than you, or there's nobody, just the glint in your eye looks amazing. God, I've had a hard day, and creating that connection, creating that alchemy where you're both just like, this is my king and this is my queen, and we will treat each other as such. And it can be delightful and fun. People sometimes feel uncomfortable around my husband and I because we are constantly validating each other and appreciating each other and adoring each other. And it's just our habit. So we're, both of our buckets are always overflowing. And if one of us doesn't feel like being intimate, we have such a full bucket and we know that our partner loves us. We know they admire us. We know they appreciate us. We don't have to make it mean that our partner doesn't care about us. It just means they don't feel like having sex that day. But I also take accountability. If my partner, if there's something that he wants, I sort of file it away and I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel like it right now, but this is something I've put on my list in my mind of, some way that I can create a fun experience with my partner. And that could be taking a tantric course. It could be exploring different types of orgasms. It could be using some spiritual connection, alchemy, sexual alchemy exercises. And I would say there's nothing sexier than fully being in your authentic truth, your confidence, your alignment, and having a partner who accepts you exactly as you are. Now, part of acceptance is accepting that some things need changing. So accepting each other doesn't mean, oh, you're getting drunk every night and self-abusing yourself. So part of acceptance is accepting that things need changing and a mutual desire for growth, always wanting to see your partner be their best. But there is nothing more delicious than having that emotional, deeply connected layer of intimacy. And I am somebody who has used sex as both a tool, as a dopamine addiction, as a way to distract me from pain. I've done all the things. And none of them are nearly as satisfying as creating that emotional vulnerability and intimacy with another person instead of substituting. And again, whatever that looks like for each person is different, and within each couple and within each month or year it could be different. But just really be honest with yourself. And I would also like to acknowledge that I've had clients who just are really bored sexually, and they're like, sex with my partner is not interesting, it's not fun. And so we talk about, okay, here's how you can make her feel more excited and spicy and and embodied and safe and fun and excited and all the things. But if they have a strong religious programming that sex is bad or wrong or shameful, or that sex should only be for children, and that is their valid experience, then that is a complicated, that is an unfortunate complication that we probably can't cover in this podcast. and is going to be very different to each unique couple. And we don't want to ever violate somebody else's boundary sexually. And that's, yeah.
I had a follow-up question here to what you mentioned about bringing it up, especially if it has been more like a long-term relationship. How can men approach that conversation where they might feel like, oh, I already know how she's gonna respond, or what she's gonna say to this or that, or they have these assumptions, or maybe some level of fear of maybe that could bring it to things getting worse, or not that they're bad, but like, how can they approach that?
Well, you actually knocked it out of the park again. I do hear that a lot. Well, if I say something, I know exactly how it's going to go. She's going to do this and say this. I'm like, well, are you approaching her the same way every time? So if you know that approaching her that way doesn't work, then let's try a new strategy. And again, I would invite them to ask themselves, in what way are they giving that which they want to receive more of? So if your partner feels adored or feels safe, accepted, adored, admired, appreciated, and you give them a safe place to communicate their feelings and their wants and their needs, and they are still not open, if you consciously say, would it be okay if we had a conversation? When would be a good time to have a conversation? I just want to tell you that I find you so attractive. And I feel really close to you when we're sexually intimate. Would it be okay if we scheduled some sort of time? Like, remember that she's going to feel rejection too. She's going to feel not good enough. She's going to make it mean that she's failing as a woman. She's going to make it mean, she's going to make it mean things too. So the same as you feel defensive and shut down and rejected, remember she does too. And that helps us sort of energetically approach it with more empathy, which energetically the other person can feel. And sex is a triggering subject for a lot of people. So it's okay that it might feel uncomfortable for both of you at the beginning. But the alternative is, again, denying, disowning, rejecting, or disidentifying from the authentic part of you that wants to explore that. And if you don't find a loving, conscious way to explore that, you're probably going to show up being a little more of a jerk in whatever your particular flavor of coping mechanisms are.
And I have a last follow-up question to what you said about the rejection and approaching it with the question, like, is this what you mean by that? I feel like some men might be listening and they're like, oh, easy to say. Like, what are some of the barriers or some of the things that are getting or could get in a way of actually asking that question?
Because it's uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and it opens us up. And vulnerability is one of the hardest skills to learn, but it's one of the most important. People get really uncomfortable around me when I say things like that, but I do it because I want to model a different behavior for them. And they're like, wait, what do you mean? What am I making it mean? I'll say this to couples because I've worked with couples who have, had years or decades sometimes of therapy, coaching, self-help, trying, and I can often break it down to like, hey, what are you making it mean when your partner does X, Y, or Z? It doesn't mean you still want them to do X, Y, or Z. But again, we could be taking that 40 units of pain to a 400 really quick. And if anybody has any questions about sex or sexuality or intimacy, I definitely invite you to ask them. This is a fun subject. I have no shame about it. I like talking about it. I love sex. I love talking about sex. I've experienced and committed a lot of the different suboptimal ways of using sex. So, yeah, I look forward to talking to everyone next week.